The story begins with Michael sitting alone on the couch, the dim light of the evening casting shadows across the room. The silence is overwhelming, broken only by the steady ticking of the clock. In his hand, a cup of coffee has gone cold, and his gaze is fixed out the window, where night has fallen. A sense of loneliness takes over, and it feels as though everything around him has become unfamiliar. Just days ago, everything seemed perfect: a beautiful wife, 2 well-behaved daughters, a cozy home, and a stable job. Yet now, it all feels distant, as if everything he once loved no longer holds any value. Just a few days ago, everything was still simple. Samantha, his wife, would smile every morning, their mornings filled with sunlight and the laughter of their daughters. But now, Michael finds himself sitting amidst the wreckage of what once seemed an unbreakable family. He doesn't even know where to start. Everything has changed too quickly, too suddenly. Suddenly, his phone vibrates, pulling him out of his thoughts. It's a message from Samantha. He hesitates for a moment before opening it. It's a brief note: "I'll be home late, an urgent meeting. Don't worry." Michael looks at the screen, a chill settling over him. Her words are all too familiar. She always says this when she has an evening out, but never before has he felt the truth behind them so clearly. He heard her car leave the house just a few hours ago, but now, an odd feeling creeps into his chest. Is everything changing slowly, but surely? Reluctantly acknowledging his doubts, Michael sets the phone down on the table, trying not to think too much about it. But then, a strange light flashes outside the window behind him. His gaze freezes, his heart begins to race. He stands up and moves toward the window, pulling aside the curtain. There, in the dim glow of the streetlights, he sees an unfamiliar car parked right in front of his house. His throat tightens. He recognizes it, the same car Samantha had casually mentioned in a conversation a few weeks ago, though he'd never paid it any mind before. Michael rushes outside, the soft glow of the garden lights illuminating his face, but they do nothing to dispel the growing darkness that's enveloping his mind. His hands are cold as he approaches the unfamiliar car, each step heavier than the last. As he draws nearer, he notices there's no one inside, just a small piece of paper resting on the driver's seat. He takes a deep breath and opens the paper. The words on it freeze him in place: "I will keep what I have started. Samantha can't leave me." The note is short, but to Michael, it feels like a direct blow to the face. He stands there, stunned, unable to breathe, as if the world has just collapsed around him. He looks up, his eyes welling with tears, but not from weakness, from an indescribable pain. The world around him seems to fade, leaving only one undeniable truth that shines brightly: Samantha is betraying him. And in that moment, he understands that everything he once trusted, everything he once loved, was nothing but an illusion. In that instant, Michael is no longer the strong man he once was. He's just a husband betrayed, standing in the darkness, feeling as though he's lost everything. Standing quietly next to the strange car, holding the note in his hand, his eyes blur from the weight of what he's just read. Each word on the paper feels like a knife cutting through his heart, and everything he thought he knew about his wife, his family, suddenly feels distant and foreign. Samantha is no longer the woman he loved, no longer the wife who cared for him all these years. But before the pain takes full control of his mind, a flash of the past suddenly rushes in. 15 years ago, Michael first met Samantha. He remembers that autumn day as if it were yesterday, when they bumped into each other in a small cafe on the side of the street. Samantha, with her bright eyes, warm smile, and irresistible beauty, immediately caught his attention. She wasn't the type of woman he thought he'd fall for, but there was something so unique about her, something that kept him captivated. They talked about common interests, about life, about future dreams. Time seemed to stop, and from that moment, he knew his life would never be the same. As their love blossomed, everything seemed like a fairy tale. Michael had found in Samantha not just a lover, but a best friend, an ideal companion. Together, they shared everything, from short getaways, evening walks on the beach, to weekends lost in old movies. Samantha had a magnetic charm, strong yet gentle, always making Michael feel safe. He thought life couldn't get any better with her by his side. Then, they got married. Their wedding day was a perfect one, filled with sunshine and flowers. Samantha, in her pristine white dress, smiled happily next to Michael. He felt like all his dreams had come true. Their married life began, and the early days were sweet and tender. Mornings waking up together, cooking meals, sharing all joys and sorrows. They had 2 daughters, Jenny and Jill, who brought them endless joy. But over time, things began to shift. What started as a love story, so simple and pure, slowly turned into something unrecognizable. Michael had noticed Samantha's growing distance, a growing focus on her work, her reluctance to spend time with the family. She seemed to have become consumed by her career, leaving Michael alone with their daughters more often than not. He tried to talk to her, to reconnect, but she always seemed too busy or too tired. He tried to push past his doubts, but deep down, he knew something was wrong. Now, standing there in the quiet night, holding the note that confirmed his worst fears, Michael couldn't help but feel the weight of everything crashing down on him. The woman he had built a life with, the woman he thought he knew, was no longer the same person. And as the reality of her betrayal set in, a flood of memories from the early days of their relationship flooded back. He had been so in love with her, so sure that nothing could break them apart. But now, it all seemed so far away, so irrelevant. Michael's heart ached as he stared at the note, realizing the devastating truth: Samantha was never going to be the woman he thought she was, and the family he cherished was slipping away. The tears in his eyes were not just for the betrayal, but for the future he had imagined, the future that no longer seemed possible. But life was never meant to stay the same as it once had. As the years went by, with the weight of work and family responsibilities bearing down on him, Michael began to notice subtle changes in Samantha. She was no longer the attentive and gentle wife she used to be. It seemed as if her work had taken over every aspect of her life, and every time he looked at her, all he saw was exhaustion and stress. He didn't know where to begin to save their relationship. Michael made several attempts to reconnect with her, trying to reignite the closeness they once shared. But the evenings were spent with just him and the kids, while Samantha was frequently away on business trips or attending long meetings. She no longer focused on those cozy dinners, those quiet conversations about their day, about life. Each time Michael tried to reach out, Samantha would either fall silent or respond curtly. A pervasive loneliness began to take over him, and he couldn't help but wonder if he had done something wrong in their marriage. One evening, when their daughters had already gone to bed, Michael sat next to Samantha on the couch in the living room. They sat in silence for what felt like an eternity, the ticking of the clock the only sound breaking the stillness. He gazed into her eyes, trying to find the connection they once had. "Samantha," he began, his voice soft, "do you feel like we're changing? Everything just doesn't feel the same anymore. I feel so distant." Samantha looked up at him, her eyes briefly flickering with a hint of weariness. She took a deep breath, as if preparing herself to confront a painful truth she had been hiding for some time. "Michael, I'm so tired," she admitted. "It's not because of you or the kids, but my work, it's consuming me, and I don't feel like I'm even myself anymore." It was the first time Samantha had really opened up about her feelings, and though Michael wanted to comfort her, he knew this problem was much bigger than just exhaustion. As their eldest daughter, Jenny, prepared to go to college, their family life began to feel even more disjointed. Samantha began to change again, but this time, the change was not just about work. She started spending more time with her friends, going out for spontaneous nights without notice, even putting more effort into her appearance, wearing makeup more often before going to work. Michael, with his overthinking nature, began to sense that something was wrong. Little did he know, these changes were just the first signs of something much bigger. Samantha had met Liam, a younger, charismatic colleague who seemed to know just how to make her feel special. In their work conversations and spontaneous lunch breaks, Samantha began to find things in Liam that she no longer saw in Michael: attention, listening, and a sense of novelty. It was at this point that she crossed a line she once thought she would never cross. The signs could no longer be hidden. Michael began to notice a shift in Samantha's behavior. She was home less, lying about her work schedule, making excuses. He couldn't understand why she had become so distant, why they couldn't go back to how things used to be. Doubts clung to him like a shadow, and everything seemed to be building toward an inevitable explosion. The day Michael found the note in the unfamiliar car, he knew everything had come to an end. The image of the loving, trustworthy Samantha he once knew was now a distant memory. The feeling of betrayal was something he couldn't wash away. His world, now, was only the shattered remnants of the past, the joyful memories he could no longer hold on to. Michael couldn't forget that moment that night. As he stepped outside and saw the strange car parked on the road, everything seemed to spin. The note in his hand was still there, like an undeniable confirmation. He couldn't understand why Samantha would do this to him, why she would lie like this. But the truth was undeniable: his wife was cheating on him. From that night onward, Michael's mind was completely consumed by doubt and pain. The small pieces of his family life, the details that once seemed insignificant, now became vivid evidence of the betrayal. He remembered the nights she said she was meeting friends or working late. Those times, he hadn't questioned her, just accepted her absence. But now, all of those things seemed to mean something entirely different. Gradually, the suspicion turned into an obsession. He couldn't stop thinking about Liam. A name that, before, had seemed like just another colleague of Samantha's. A young, confident man with a friendly demeanor. But now, in Michael's eyes, Liam had become the most detestable enemy. Michael started to track her more closely, every time she was out, every time her phone rang. Small signs began to spark more doubts in his mind. Samantha no longer paid attention to the little things, no longer shared her thoughts or feelings like she had in the early days of their marriage. A week after discovering the truth, Michael made up his mind. He couldn't continue living in the fog of uncertainty any longer. He had to confront Samantha, had to get the truth once and for all. He couldn't let himself be trapped in suspicion, and more importantly, he couldn't live in a marriage where he no longer knew what was real and what was false. Michael decided to follow her one evening when she said she would be meeting a colleague for work. He followed her silently, the tension between them stretching like a taut string. Each step she took felt like it was suffocating him, as though he were about to witness something irreversible. He watched her walk into a fancy restaurant, the kind they only went to for special occasions. But this time, she wasn't there with him. She was there with Liam. Michael stood still outside the window, watching them sit at a table together. She smiled, their eyes locking, and for a moment, it seemed like the whole world had shrunk to just the two of them. A surge of anger rose in Michael's chest, but alongside it, he also felt his heart break. Samantha was not just betraying him physically, she was betraying him emotionally. She had forgotten about him in the very days they had built this family, stepping into the arms of another man. He couldn't stand it anymore. The fury and despair surged within him, making it impossible to hold back. He turned and walked away, but a part of him knew this was the end. There was no turning back. When Michael returned home, he sank into the couch in the darkness. It felt as if the air in the house had grown heavy, no longer a space filled with the warmth of family. Samantha still hadn't returned, but Michael couldn't stop thinking about what he had just witnessed. He didn't know what to do next. He had loved her so deeply, and now, her betrayal had shattered everything he believed in. By the time the next morning came and Samantha returned home, Michael had already made up his mind. He could no longer remain silent. He had to face her, even though he knew that this confrontation would change everything forever. "Samantha," he spoke, his voice deep and cold. "I've seen everything." She flinched, her eyes wide with panic, but only for a brief moment. She knew she couldn't hide anymore. Michael, Samantha stammered, struggling to find the right words to explain. She hesitated for a moment, then lowered her head, unable to meet his gaze. You don't understand. It's too late now. Her words hit Michael like a physical blow. She hadn't just betrayed him physically, she had abandoned him emotionally long ago. They had grown apart without him even realizing it. So, you've fallen for him, haven't you? Michael asked, each word cutting deep into his heart. Samantha remained silent, her eyes filled with tears, but she couldn't speak. She couldn't answer him because there was truly nothing to justify what she had done. Michael felt the pain spread throughout his body. He couldn't look at her anymore. He stepped outside, leaving the home that once felt like his sanctuary. In that moment, all the beautiful memories of their life together shattered like broken glass. Finally, Michael knew he had to save himself. He couldn't keep living in the shadow of her betrayal. But the price was too high, and each step he took felt heavier than the last. The coldness enveloped Michael as he walked away from the house, the place that once held so many memories. It was late, but he didn't feel tired. Instead, there was a deep, gnawing pain in his chest, like a wound that would never heal. His mind kept spinning with the images of the previous night, Samantha sitting next to Liam, hand in hand, her eyes no longer his, but those of a woman lost to another man. Michael couldn't accept it. He couldn't believe that the woman he had loved, the woman with whom he had shared so many dreams, could so easily betray him. He drove aimlessly through the empty streets, with no particular destination, just trying to ease the knot in his throat. The entire night, his mind was consumed by thoughts. Had he done something wrong? Had all the good things he had worked for over the years not been enough? The questions spiraled, like a storm that never stopped. He pulled over, sitting in the darkness, feeling every moment stretch on. Time seemed to stop, leaving only loneliness and betrayal to overwhelm everything. The next morning, Michael returned home, where Samantha was waiting for him. She looked at him with a gaze full of panic, as if she had never been prepared for such a tense confrontation. Michael said nothing. He silently walked in, his eyes meeting Samantha's, no longer the look of a loving husband, but of someone deeply wounded. I've seen enough, Samantha, Michael said, his voice hoarse, unable to hold back his emotions. I saw what you did last night. You've betrayed me, not just physically, but emotionally. And now, what do you want to say to me? Do you think you can explain everything away? Samantha's face went pale. She looked down, her hands trembling. Michael stood there, the words hanging heavily between them, but she couldn't find the strength to respond. She knew there was nothing left to say. Samantha stood in silence, her hands trembling. She knew that no words could undo what had been done. Her eyes were swollen from crying, but she couldn't find the right apology, the right words to salvage this. She had gone too far, and there was no way back. I can't keep doing this to you, Michael continued, his voice now cold, filled with a deep, impenetrable sadness. What have you done to us? You've shattered everything we built. And I can't continue living in a relationship built on lies like this. I can't forgive you. Each word felt like a knife to Samantha's heart. She wanted to rush over to him, to explain that she was weak, lost, but she knew it was too late. The guilt and regret surged in her chest, but she couldn't undo any of it. She had pushed herself to the edge, and now, everything was beyond saving. Michael, I'm sorry, Samantha finally said, her voice frail, devoid of any strength. I know I've been wrong, I know. But I didn't know what to do anymore. The feeling of being with Liam, it was like an escape from all the pressures, all the exhaustion I've been carrying for so long. I never thought it would go this far. Michael stood in silence, his eyes filled with pain. He couldn't believe her words. His feeling now wasn't one of regret, but of absolute resolve. He knew that if he continued in this marriage, it would only cause more hurt. Love had died, and Samantha had killed it with her betrayal. "It's over, Samantha," Michael said, his hands clenched in fury. "I can't keep living in a relationship where I don't trust anymore. I can't love someone who's betrayed me like this. I want a divorce." The room felt still, as if time itself had stopped. Samantha took a step back, her eyes brimming with tears, but she said nothing. She knew that Michael's words were final, and honestly, she didn't deserve for them to be anything but that. Her life had changed forever. Their relationship was over, and there was nothing she could do but watch the man she once loved walk away. Michael turned, walking out of the house. His heart felt heavy, but deep down, he knew it was the right decision. He couldn't stay in a marriage where every trust had been broken. The door to the house closed behind him, and a new chapter in his life began. Samantha watched his figure disappear, her heart filled with regret, but she knew she didn't deserve another chance. That day wasn't just the end of a relationship. It marked the beginning of a new journey, a journey that Michael would have to walk alone, finding himself after everything that had happened. Michael stepped out of the house, the late afternoon light streaming through the clouds, painting the sky golden. The coldness inside him still hadn't melted away, but at least, he had made a decisive choice. The door behind him closed, not only marking the end of a marriage, but also the start of something new. He felt the silence enveloping him, as if everything had settled. No more internal conflict, no more uncertainty about the future. Everything was now clear. He drove to his new home, a place where he no longer saw the broken memories, a place where he would start over. The empty rooms no longer held the traces of a once close family, but at least here, Michael could feel freedom, peace after the storm. He didn't need to explain his decisions to anyone. The pain wouldn't last forever, for he knew time would heal all wounds. Day by day, Michael began to rebuild his life. He spent time on his work, on hobbies he had long forgotten. Mornings became his own, quiet and reflective, while afternoons were spent walking through the park, watching the world around him change. Those simple things, which he had once overlooked, became precious moments that reminded him of what happiness felt like. He no longer had to worry about someone else hurting him, because now, he was the one who held the reins of his future. But forgetting the past wasn't easy. Sometimes, Michael still heard the echoes of Samantha's footsteps in his memories, still felt the loneliness of those quiet nights when they were still a family. But he knew that was the past, and life had to move on. He couldn't keep living in the shadow of days gone by. One day, as he sat at his usual cafe, sipping a steaming cup of coffee, his phone buzzed. A message from Jenny. He opened it and read the simple, but meaningful words, "Dad, I miss you. Jill and I will come visit you this weekend." The words filled Michael's heart with warmth, as if family love had never faded, even after the storms. He knew that, no matter what, his children would always be his greatest support. Even though his marriage had ended, the love of his children would never change. He felt a new hope begin to bloom in his chest. His children were still there, always ready to love and embrace him. When the weekend arrived, he picked up the girls and had them over at his small new house. The space no longer felt empty but filled with the warmth of family. Michael didn't need to explain his decisions to his daughters, they understood him. They shared dinner together, chatting about the simple things, and Michael knew that, no matter how life tested him, he still had his family, and that love would always be the driving force that moved him forward. Some time later, on a quiet morning, Michael met Olivia, an old friend. They sat together, talking about life, about everything that had happened in the past. Olivia had always been there for him when he needed someone to confide in, and now, their relationship had grown into something deeper. Michael knew that, even though he wasn't ready for a new relationship, having Olivia in his life made him feel less alone. Gradually, Michael found joy in the small things again. He was no longer the man who had failed in love, but a strong man who could rise and start over. Though his past couldn't be erased, he knew the future was his, and he would never let himself be crushed by the pain of the past. On a sunny afternoon, as he walked through the park with Olivia, Michael felt lighter. The vast sky ahead of him seemed to open up, offering countless new opportunities. Michael didn't know what the future held, but he no longer felt afraid. He knew he had weathered the storm within himself, and now, he could move forward with a new sense of trust and a heart at peace.